If you'd asked Marcus Sawyer's younger self what he'd be doing as a career, I imagine he probably would have said something related to football, or soccer as some of us know it. This is not surprising given his trajectory as a young person growing up in London. And he certainly started on those plans. But life, as usual, has a way of changing things around. Marcus rose from a recruiting expert at careerbuilder.com to become a global Fortune 500 executive at the Adecco Group. He's been ranked in the top 100 most influential industry leaders by Staffing Industry Analysis. As the founder of EQ Community, he has activated a tribe of the top 1% of leaders that connects executives seeking meaningful work with inclusive firms ready to cultivate a diverse workforce. In this episode, Marcus shares how he got into the corporate world when his football career plans took a detour. He explains why diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies have to be nuanced depending on mission, needs, and location. He also gives his observations as to why building a business and finding opportunities look different in the U.S. than it does in Great Britain. In the midst of this, we have a great conversation about what community can and should look like. Welcome to the Global Chatter. All right, so we're back with the latest episode of the Global Chatter, and I have no doubts that this is going to be a fun episode because all my episodes are fun. However, I think that there's going to be a perspective that is shared today that we haven't seen a lot on the show yet. And so I am so excited to have this guest on who you guys already know because you've heard the intro. But Marcus, welcome to the Black Expats Global Chatter.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I'm honored to be here.
I think we're going to have fun, and at least I'm going to have fun. Hopefully you will have fun, but I think that we're going to really get into some things. And so I like to give people context. So where in the world are you currently located?
Right now, I am in Oakland. So I'm on the West Coast of the United States.
Come on, Bay Area.
Yeah, come on.
How long have you been in, I don't want to say San Fran. You are in Oakland. How long have you been in Oakland?
Yeah, so I've been in Oakland 3 years now. So just, not too long, but 3 years. So enough to soak it up. Well, it would be in normal times, right? If there wasn't a pandemic.
Right. I was going to say, did you guys move right before the pandemic or during the pandemic?
2018. So
okay.
It's crazy because we're in 2022 now. So that first year, I remember it. And then after that, it's a bit of a blur in between, right? So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so I guess if people can hear you to us, okay, to me, you have a bit of an accent. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in London. I was born in Northwest London and grew up in Northwest London. So,
well, let me ask you this question. Being in the Bay Area, how does the weather compare?
It doesn't. So, right? Yeah, I mean, that is a big draw. There were many a day in London where you just look outside the window and you hope that the rain would stop. But the thing about London is like once it's summertime, everybody's out. So, and the motives for being out are pretty similar to have good vibes and good energy. So you can't really be here in the summer.
Yeah. Man, here's the funny part. I've been to the Bay Area and I always think it's too cold, but I live in the South. So like
cold.
It's
well, you're probably aware of this, but I'll highlight it anyway. You know, there's microclimates in the Bay. Right. So when you're in San Francisco over the bridge, it's about 3 to 4 degrees cooler. Yeah. And then when you're in Oakland, it's a bit warmer. So I don't know how much time you spent there. And then when you go into Palo Alto, it's another 4 or 5 degrees warmer. So it depends on where you actually are in the Bay.
Fair.
And so, yeah. But it's probably not as hot as
North Carolina. Yeah, exactly. This is the thing. It's
we were seeing 90 pretty early on. Like,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and we get humidity. So, yeah, I'm
Okay,
good at the Bay Area. Y'all don't get humidity.
No. It's not that hot, but yeah, I mean, how hot do you want it?
Well, this is also the girl who's lived in Doha, Qatar. So
Oh, wow.
right, exactly. I can do hot.
That's sweltering.
Yes, I agree. So let me ask you this question. Growing up in London, did you have a family that traveled? Or was there an international component to y'all's story?
So I'll answer the second part first. So there's definitely an international component to our story. Did we travel? No, because my mom didn't like to get on aeroplanes. So once I was released at a certain age, we went everywhere. But we got family. So background, my dad's Nigerian, my mum's Jamaican. We had family in Nigeria. My grandfather used to go back and forth. And then a lot of family in Jamaica still, and a lot of family in the US. Some went to Florida, some went to Jamaica, Queens, in New York, right? That's kind of a place where a lot of the Jamaicans go. So I've always had connections there, but I didn't travel that much outside of Europe, should I say, when I was young. And so there was that's probably two things. Like my mom didn't like to get on planes, and she does now, which is cool. So she's come to see me, which I'm happy about. But also, cost right at the time, like getting on a plane wasn't just the thing that you would do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went around Europe quite a bit though.
When you started traveling around Europe, was that with family or as a young adult?
When I went around Europe the first time, I went with my dad. He was a fighter, taekwondo fighter. So he was fighting in a tournament in Holland. Okay. So I went to go and watch him. So he's an Olympian. And he had a tournament. That was the first time I remember leaving the country.
Okay, that's like a really slick thing to slip in. He was an Olympian. He did taekwondo. That was his thing.
Yeah. So he was a coach for England. He's European champion. He done all of that stuff. So that was his thing. So
I feel like he probably did he travel a lot? Because
he traveled a lot. Yeah. He traveled a lot. And he used to tell me that travel is the best form of education. But I didn't really travel that much at the time, so I couldn't feel it until I went away. But it was cool. But once I got to a certain point, and I think I was 17, 18, and I could travel on my own, I was cool.
You were doing it?
Yeah.
Where did you go as a young adult without your family?
I went to Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of the first places I went to.
Okay.
There was a discounted flight. And me and my cousin decided to go to Mexico.
Okay.
From London. We went to the US a few times, went to New York quite a lot to see family.
Yeah.
I went to Ibiza. I went to France a lot. That was fine. The Eurostar wasn't invented at that time. So you couldn't just jump on a train.
Yeah.
But I traveled a lot. And then, at that time, those are probably some of the main places that I remember.
What I'm very curious, because we're going to talk about your career in a bit. Did you ever think, or was it even a thought, that you would have sort of an international aspect to your career, or was it just something that's just sort of happened in the things that you've done?
Well, it's interesting because I've always had in the back of my mind that travel is one of the best forms of education, from what my dad said to me. And I knew that he was traveling for his work. So I knew that my family, my mum, they'd be supportive of it if it happened. So I always had it in the back of my mind, if there's a job you can travel. And it first started just nationally. Yeah. So in the UK, and that wasn't super exciting, but I was on trains and planes, and trains mainly, right?
Yeah.
And then football, traveling a little bit there. So I didn't think that, yes, I'm going to be traveling all over the world into multiple countries, but it was always an aspect that I was keen to do, or something I was interested in doing.
So when you went to university, what did you study?
I studied sports science at University of Bath, but I did not finish university.
Okay.
So I dropped out.
Well, that's totally fine. What was your intention, though, of why did you choose that as a major or concentration?
I had a football scholarship, so I was on a fast track to become a professional footballer. So I was doing that, and I was studying sports science, but I wasn't super interested in that. I just wanted to play football,
Yeah.
Had I have done business, I might have stayed. And so that was kind of the turning point for me.
Wow. So what made you leave college or university, as you guys call it?
What made me leave? Just, I didn't feel like I was learning what I wanted to learn, and I was doing it to play football. And so I decided to continue to play football. And then I played semi-professional for quite a while, and then was in and out of different clubs, and then decided to get a job in the gym to keep fit. But they didn't have traditional gym jobs. So then I had a sales job. And then I realized, oh, okay, like you can sell gym memberships and make a little bit of money. And then there's probably other better sales jobs than this. So I started going on that path. And yeah, that was basically it.
Oh my gosh. What was your first sales job?
First ever sales job. Well, I used to sell appointments. So I used to be an appointment scheduler, and that's so you had to like be on the phone, and now they call them SDRs. So they got fancy title, sales development reps, but it was just basically booking appointments for different types of companies every day. So you'd have to learn about different companies immediately, instantly, what they've done, and then start booking appointments. So I'd say that was one of the first ones that I'd done.
Did you enjoy sales?
Yes, but certain aspects. So I don't enjoy the cold calling. I made cold calls, so I never had to make a cold call again. So I try and learn more about it, and then what I could do otherwise. I enjoy doing business, so doing deals. It feels like playing sports and scoring a goal when you agree on something that makes sense for each other.
Yeah.
So it's less of the actual selling or sales aspect and more around collaborating and providing value. And then when it goes well, it's good for everyone.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting because I personally do not like sales as persuasive as a speaker as I am. I think for me, I'm like, it's the thing. I think a lot of people get uncomfortable with sales. It's, you don't want to feel like you're pressuring someone, like, and you don't want to come across as, and I think this is a stereotype, but you don't want to feel like, I don't want to feel like I'm just getting to know you because I want to sell this thing or I want to get you to buy this thing, even though that's part of the reason why you're trying to understand this person.
Sales gets such a bad reputation, but it's the most important thing in business.
Yeah.
And it's the reason that it's on the top line.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that just learning that you're not really ever selling anything if you're just having a conversation, but you've got to find yourself in the right spaces.
Yeah.
And as you get older, you develop that because you have more things in common with other people, and travel's another aspect of that.
Yeah.
You're not really selling someone if you're just having a conversation around their journey and your journey, and then there happens to be some common ground. But I think when you're calling somebody cold and they don't know you, building that relationship within 30 seconds is tough.
Yeah.
And it's like, are you like a slimy car salesperson or whatever, right? Like that's the vibe and energy. It's just like you almost hide that you're in sales. But I tell you what, as you move up, even especially in tech and so on, people want to know that you can sell to help you grow and develop your career.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And to be honest, I think it gives you so much practice talking to different kinds of people in different places, where I think if especially communication isn't always necessarily your strongest suit, I think you can build it up getting comfortable talking to others. I read somewhere that I think one of your earliest jobs, and I'm fascinated by this, was at LA Fitness, which
everyone always thinks that.
and this was in the UK. This was not.
It was not in LA.
Okay.
This was not in LA. It's funny because even my son, I always talk to him about the LA Fitness stuff, and I read him books before we go to bed. And every night he said, like, "Can we do a daddy story?" Like, what's a daddy story? It's like at LA Fitness, when you used to work in this small area and used to sell gym memberships. And all. So I'm like, oh, it actually had some value. So I don't know. Happy to share anything that's interesting to your audience.
About LA Fit. Well, I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I mean, at this time you're in the UK. You're still in London, correct? Is that where you?
Yeah. Central London, we've said, yeah.
So how did you? Was there a franchise? Like, how did you even? How you end up working for LA Fitness in London? Is where I'm trying to understand.
The hilarious thing is think of it as like the concept. Like it's not in LA, but it's like LA fitness, like you want to be fit like you're in LA, right? So yeah, I think I applied for the job online, or even might have even been in a newspaper.
On paper, right?
Yeah. I'm not that old, but papers were still around.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and then again, as I said, I was trying to find a job that was going to help me continue sports. So I wanted to go to a gym to continue working out for free, basically. But which I continued to do, but they didn't have traditional jobs where you could walk around and help people and start to become a personal trainer and go along that track.
Gotcha.
That part was full, but they did have the sales jobs.
Okay.
And that was how I got into it.
Oh my gosh. How long were you there for?
I want to say 2 or 3 years. So a little bit of time. Yeah.
Okay. So what did you decide to do once you left there? Like, did you decide you wanted to go to another big corporate? Did you just want to stay in sales? Where did you go?
Well, after that, I started to look for opportunities that were related to sales because I realized that I was highly underpaid. I was on like $13,000 or whatever pounds. And I was getting a lot of my money from commissions. And I saw that there was an opportunity. There was something that was happening. And companies were starting to use newspapers less to advertise online. Yeah. There was a company that set up in England at the time, which is called careerbuilder.com. And I didn't realize how big they were. So I applied for the job, I think, and this is always the thing, like the recruiter, I don't know how good he was at his role because he gave me an opportunity. And once I jumped in, I got in front of some of the hiring managers, and it was like, I had to show how I would be able to develop B2B sales because I was doing a bit more B2C at the time. Got the opportunity and then started on cold calling there. And then I got promoted every year. And then by the end of it, I became the director for Europe for the staff and recruiting group at Career Builder over a 10-year period of time. Yeah. So I was kind of on that track. And then it was funny because you were seeing people that were coming out of university trying to get the entry-level job that I'd already got. But because I dropped out, I was in there earlier. Yeah. So it just, Now,
and I mean, with Career Builder, correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like I remember it's an international company. It wasn't just, I know Career Builder. So yeah.
Yeah, Career Builder was, all over the world. And that was a big part of it. So when we had trips, we'd have like these President's Clubs trips that were in different countries. They bought some European arms as well to the business. And also the big headquarters was in Chicago. So, and it was a lot more well known in the US than it was in the UK.
Yes. Yes.
So that was, and so you then start to realize, wow, you're actually part of something
bigger.
A lot bigger. Yeah. And that just helped to have career progression and meet some great people and grow with them over a long period of time.
So can I ask you, during your time with them, I would imagine because of these different offices, you're working with diverse teams globally, correct?
Yeah. So initially, no, because I was focused specifically on the UK market.
Yes.
As it started to grow, absolutely. And so it was diverse teams with diverse products and diverse services, different ways of thinking. So we were buying a lot of companies, and then so we'd have to integrate those companies in different markets into the culture. Yeah. And so, got to connect with a lot of different folks in different countries, which is cool.
So if you think of yourself back in that period, I'm curious, how did you start? How were you cultivating community and learning to work with these diverse teams? Because we talk about DEI a lot right now, right? But like on a very practical level, what are some of the things that maybe you even noticed were challenges for you initially, or just challenges in general, and you were able to sort of kind of move past? Or what are the things that were done really well when you've got these people in different locations, but you're trying to work on this common mission?
Well, sales is it can be very one-track minded.
Okay.
So you're focusing on hitting your numbers and staying in the job. Yeah. And so it's like hardcore. And so one of the ways that I thought about that was any friend that I had that I thought could do this job, I would recommend them to Career Builder. So by the end of it, a lot of my good friends worked with me and they done really well. So we actually cultivated this community inside of the organization where I had people from different backgrounds, because if you think about it, as a company that's trying to set up an operation
in
a new country and they're not really too sure where to go. And I was doing pretty well personally. So then my referrals started to hold weight. So I bring people inside the organization and then start to cultivate that. And then it was about, okay, we know how we operate today because we're even from part of the same front. How do we connect with more people? And a lot of it was there was a big kind of, I would say, social scene at Caribbean, especially in London. Like, you'd all go out on a Friday evening, all of you, all the time. So the whole office would go together.
Okay.
That is not for dinner, for drinks. And this was every Friday.
Okay.
And then you'd start to see, and then people would start to come together around that. And when you were at a certain age in your 20s, everybody would do that. And you just build these relationships naturally and organically. You'd find out what people are interested in. Football's a big thing in the UK.
Right.
So what's your team? And how are you working? And you start to cultivate that. And then people would feel that culture. And yeah, so I suppose those were some of the ways, but it's very organic.
Yeah. I mean, can I ask you this question as someone who's always thinking about inclusion and whatnot?
Yeah, go on.
So I hear that, but then here's the career person in me. So were you all, let me ask this question first. We were
not all guys.
Were you all around the same age?
Yeah, I would say that we were similar ages. We're entry level, but we were the only people of color in the organization.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So I didn't even realize that part. So similar age, similar probably racial ethnicity stories, background, similar, give or take. I guess my question is, the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but does this still work if you're a natural introvert, or if you're a natural person who that's not your scene? Like, are you still able to be part of the community without having the ability to go out on Friday night and hang out with the team?
Yeah. So these were the days where people worked in the office. And so,
it was like a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Yeah. So it was a situation where it wouldn't be, you'd have to do it on your own time. Sometimes you finish early. Sometimes you have lunches together.
Yeah.
You would just meet with people, and we were in sale. We didn't even know, like, all the product, all the back office, that was all in different countries.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't see that side of how they would operate. I can just tell you from my experience that there were a lot of people that built some good relationships and connected with others because they spoke to each other.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time now you hide behind screens, and it's like, well, I don't really feel like doing that, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, have you tried it?
Yeah.
Well, like, maybe not. And the other things as well is like, and this was like the old school. People say, oh, well, why do you have to be the person that is getting into the office early? I used to try it all the time. This is like old school hardcore stuff, to beat anybody in the office. That was just me. That's how much I was on it. And not everyone's the same. And then so what would happen is every time I'd come in, it was the joke, right? And I'd be like, yeah, and I'm just setting stuff up because if I don't come in, no one's going to do it. Right. And I would do that just to have a little bit of banter with someone. And then I remember people would come in, they come in at normal time. You'd give you'd look at your watch, even though they're early, right? And it would be the banter.
Yeah.
And so there was like a kind of hardcore working environment, and it was about surviving that and getting through it, and then being able to think for yourself and then create an environment that you thought would make sense for you and others to thrive in.
Gotcha.
And you have to realize that everyone wasn't there, but without a seat at the table, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Nah, man. Oh, you're so right. I was just thinking about how there's so much stuff I get done when I just pick up the phone and call a person.
Yeah.
Like I had a situation the other day, and we were going back and forth in email, and I was like, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm just going to call you. And here's the funny part. I called the person, left a voicemail. They immediately handled it over. Like, they immediately handled the problem and then emailed me. And it was just because I picked up the phone and said, nah, I'm not scared to talk to you. I want to get this done. So you're right. I mean, and I think COVID, we've kind of lost some of that because, you know.
Yeah. And then it's like you go to the extreme level that everything needs to be a Zoom, or everything needs to be like, it has to be. a Zoom. Yeah, so can you be in front of the Zoom? And again, old school, like we used a phone.
Right.
I still remember like my friends' phone numbers from school. Like
Wow.
I know their numbers off by heart in my head. I know because I used to pick up the phone and call people. And that was also our tool of choice in sales, using the phone. So you kind of, and then now it's like text, and you've got to read between the lines in text.
Right.
And like, maybe you put, if you're like, are you really cry face laughing when you send that message? You might have done a little thing. Yeah. And an LOL is like, I don't really find that funny. So it's kind of reading between the lines, and it's hard if you don't speak to people.
And this is a complete different tangent, but now that we're on sales, I'm kind of stuck on this. This is true. Do you think sales now, do you think it's harder for folks who are in the sales space now because people aren't picking up their, there's so many more barriers to kind of cutting someone off if you're trying to sell them something?
Well, yes, I agree with you. And I think that sales has evolved based on the tools that are available and the channels that people want to be met at, for want of a better term. And so it's not about picking up the phone and drilling people. It's more inbound. So how do you, and because there's more information.
Yeah.
So before, when I got on the phone with you, I have to figure out who you are within like 30 seconds. But now there's so much information online. Like if I do my research, we can be prepared and have a common thread, or I can send you an email, or I can find out, does somebody know you, or do I know someone that knows you?
Yeah.
And so sales becomes less important when you build your brand and build your network, because then your network then sells for you. Like I was in a meeting earlier today, and then somebody said, "Oh, I've got like 3 people I could recommend to you." Great. I didn't even think about that or ask for that. But I think that you realize when you're having conversations, letting people know what you do, who trust you, and you trust them, and you do the same for them, is super important as a sales tool. And then you become a super connector. So you're not actually selling anything. The definition of sales for me is, we used to have, was persuading someone to do something they wouldn't have done had you have not existed.
Okay.
Right. So it's not order taking. It's like if your vibe or energy didn't exist, would they do what you're asking them to do? And they don't have to do it directly through you.
Yeah.
It could just be through a connection.
All right. So if you're joining us after the break, you know that we are really going to transition to talk about the work that Marcus is doing right now, because I actually am quite fascinated by this. He does not know this, but I'm fascinated. And so your facial expression is like, is she really? I really am, because you can see my face. But let's talk about EQ Community. Why did you create this? What was the catalyst?
Well, after being in a position where I had some opportunities that had landed into my sphere, as it were, just kind of in a really serendipitous way. It's like, how can I create that more deliberately for me personally? So I got an opportunity to move from career builder gym memberships, and then I became a Fortune 500 exec at a company called Adecco. Mm-hmm. And I saw a lot of the world at the time. One time I traveled to 107. I had 107 flights in 1 year.
Oh my gosh.
And so I saw a lot. And then I kind of looked around at some of the boardrooms and areas, and I just realized there was less and less people who looked like me in those positions. And I thought to myself, well, what is the most important thing? So we were talking about sales earlier, right? And a way to alleviate sale is making sure that you've got a brand. How do you have a brand? It's not just what you have online, but people need to know you. It's less about who you know, it's more about who knows you. And that also rings true when you're trying to get your next opportunity, because a lot of the best opportunities come through referral. So I wanted to create a deliberate space that would empower people from diverse backgrounds to get access to opportunities that they might not have otherwise seen. And then on the flip side, there were companies that said they wanted to be more inclusive and create a sense of belonging. And I wanted to remove every barrier and every excuse in order to give them access to really high quality talent. So that was a lot of the genesis of it. And around that is giving people the tools. And I always talk about the 4 C's. You've got that great community that can help you develop and thrive. So we would say in Jamaica, each one teach one. You have access to careers. So really high quality careers, like where are they? Like, but direct access, not just online and you go into some black hole database that no one ever sees. And then the connections that glue all that together. Like, are you really connected with other people that can help you progress and move forward? And then that ultimately leads to capital. And that capital can help you fuel your journey, your family's journey, and those that come after you. So that's really how I thought about it, and thought that there wasn't really a space that was doing that for me in particular, or just even more so just like my network was, there was a way to leverage that to bring people together and cultivate.
I'm curious, like when you were, when you're working at your previous company and with all the travel that you were doing in terms of the reflection in leadership, is that just not, was that inclusive of the fact that, for example, you're going to all these different countries. So let's say you were in, I'm picking a random country. I'm not saying you've been there, but let's say you were in India. Were you seeing leadership that was at least reflective of that community and culture? Or was it still at the very senior level? It was not as diverse as the places where the company had tentacles in?
Look, I think the thing about DE&I and just diversity in general is, depending on where you are in the globe, each, let's take it from this perspective, each country, then you can go to, in the US, each state and each city has their opportunities and challenges. So my cousin, he lives in Japan and he's been there for 12 years. The big disparity there is gender. Like, women are not in the world of work as much as they should be today. So that's kind of like the first step.
Yeah.
If you go to another country, and let's say the US, for instance, it's getting more black people into senior positions in tech, because the population's, I think it's 13% of African Americans, and it's like 3% in tech, and that's not even in leadership. Right. So I think each area has its opportunity to become more diverse, but the rationale behind that, I believe, should be the same. And the rationale should be, diversity is a superpower. And the reason diversity is a superpower is because you have the opportunity to see things from multiple angles and perspectives, and then bring that collective view together to allow you to act accordingly with vision that is more fruitful than if you've done it alone. And I think that people forget the reasoning behind it.
Gotcha. So with that being said, though, if we were to use Japan as an example, just because you mentioned your cousin living there, have you seen instances where, with what you said and kind of what your mission and belief, what with your mission that you've shared, have you seen pushback to that sort of like, well, why do we, because there's what people tend to say, well, we'll just let the best person there, right? Without the assumption that, yes, but have you also noticed that you have structural barriers that are keeping maybe women or groups or whatever? And so I guess my question is for you, is that even those conversations with companies and organizations, have you had the experience of pushback where folks are like, well, we don't see this as a problem?
I know for a fact that the pushback exists. I avoid that like the plague. And the way that I avoid that is I only walk through open doors, because there's only so much time that we have on this earth. And there are a lot of open doors where people do want to help and do want to move things forward, but they don't necessarily know how. So I spend all of my energy and effort in doing that. And I believe in business, once you get momentum, it then allows you to then go back into maybe some of the areas that need more help. So I just don't even spend time with those companies. If you don't see it, like, shame on you. You don't get it. You've never watched a sports game in your life. You haven't realized that people need to play in different positions. Right? That's
great analogy, by the way.
Yeah, like, you can't all play in the same position and win.
Yeah.
How's that going to work? Right? So I think that if people don't get it, there's a reason why they decide not to get it. And the reason why they decide not to get it is a lot of the time, and I always put it into two kind of camps. And one is just like, you don't care. Like, you genuinely don't care, so don't pretend that you care. Like, or you don't want to take the time, because there's enough information out there on this thing that we call the internet that tells you how it can help forward. So what you need to do is you probably need some social proof.
Yeah.
And so let's work with the person that's next to you that does get it and help them. And then that starts to have a knock-on effect and more network effect. So I'm really focused on the open areas. If you're telling me, I don't believe that we should have more black people, I'll go, okay, bye, see you later. I haven't got time. You're cold calling me now.
So I'm curious, having you been well, let me get my words right. So with you growing up in the UK and now being in the US, do you see this work approached differently or the same, having been in both cultures? And that can even be the terminology used or how folks even consider DEI. And then there's all the other stuff like BEJ and everything else that comes after that. But do you see sort of the approach being similar from because you're in the US, or do you see it like we do things maybe a little bit different in the UK, or are the conversations different around this work?
The approach is different. The problem is the same.
Okay, so tell me about the approach.
So the approach in the UK with anything that's to do with race is generally covert. In the US, it's generally overt from what I've seen, which means that we've got categories. There are certain, so like whether it's African American or it's like Latin or it's gender, that's all like out there, that information. In the UK, that doesn't exist in that way.
Really?
Yeah. And it might change since I've been back there, but like it's just they might ask you a question, but it's not really collected at scale, that information.
Okay.
So what generally tends to happen is a lot of the companies that are fast growing or companies that are worth being at, people get those opportunities through referrals. So there's still kind of an old boys, old club network in the UK in particular. And I'd say that's a similar problem in the US, but the way that's handled is probably by where you went to school. As well as race, right? But where you went to school, like who you know, like what that badge is. The university thing's big-ish in the UK. You've got some of the elite, but it's not a barrier, a huge barrier to entry. You can still do all right and kind of figure your way around that. So I think that the problem is similar, but the approach is slightly different to how it's tackled. My sister, she's in HR. She's a global HR director in a UK company. So we have these conversations.
Yeah.
About some of the differences. And then I've got cousins who are in the US. I've got a lot of family in the US. And yeah, there's problems the same, just the approach is different, right?
I mean, I also like to think in the US, we're really loud.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
We're just, not that other people don't have the same problems, but we're just very like, it'll be trending on Twitter because, we have the numbers and the voice, I think, in a different way than some other groups, to be very honest.
And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And there's a lot of benefits to operating in that way. And there's also challenges as well, because people see you coming. And if you look at it in a covert way, you can maybe have the same energy and the same feeling, and then acting on it in a slightly different way, and no one sees you coming.
Yeah.
So that's, but then on the other side, I think in the UK, like, we should say more and do more, but it's hard to understand where to go because there isn't that uniform approach, organization, subgroups, and so on and so forth. Like, as an example, like in the US, you could say that there's a platform here that's for Black talent, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't say that in the UK. Don't know why. But like, well, I do know why. But the main reason is that might look like it's not that inclusive, right? And
right.
but that's the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
So and I think the challenge here sometimes in the US is like, we solve the problem with some of the tools that we were given initially, which was like with segregation. So we segregate ourselves.
Right.
So now we're in our own groups.
Right.
But you almost need, if you're trying to get into the other groups, you need allies and people to help you to get into them. If you're not, then you've got to create your own.
Right.
Not groups, but environments.
Right.
So it's like, it's so complex, and I do not have the answer. I just know what I've seen.
I mean, I read a thing called the Black Expat.
Right, exactly. We're on a Black Expat.
I mean, here and I've told this story. People are like, "Why'd you call it the Black Expat?" Honestly, so that Black and brown folks could find it.
Yeah,
it wasn't as political as people thought. But then I would be asked in interviews, and they're like, "Oh, there's all this political thought to it," and I'm like, "No." But then, and you want to know what's something funny to what you said? I remember I told a guy, "Yeah, I'm starting this thing called the Black Expat," and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, okay, so it's for Black Americans." And I said, "No." And and I got where he was coming from. He's originally from Mali, but he grew up like all around the world, and he is an expat. But the term expat had never been applied to him because he's Sub-Saharan African.
Yeah.
And then also very much the term Black, like I lived in the continent. Everyone's Black, right? Or most people are Black. So it's not like you're Black, I'm Black. No one needed to identify by color. So he was like, "Oh yeah, this is an American thing." And I said, "I promise you, the only reason I called it the Black Expat is so that Black folks would know that the resources are there for them. But it does not necessarily mean there are a ton of people who follow the Black Expat who are not Black, but they know that they are not the center of the focus." So to your point, you're right. It's like I think the reason we label stuff here is just so that we can find it. Those of us who are in that group, because sometimes when things are not labeled, we get lost in the sauce, right? And this is why we will have, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this. We've seen businesses Black owned, Black founded, like all of that. And because we want to support that, but I get your point where it could also be a little bit of removal from, or kind of resegregating yourselves. But at the same time, it's like, we're trying to support, but also
it's hard.
Yeah,
And I don't know the right answer. And I think there's probably certain things that should be labeled in that way, and maybe some that shouldn't be. Or there's an acronym. Like, I know companies that just have like the B, and then everyone kind of knows what it is. And it's just
BIPOC, because every time I see BIPOC, people know this about me. I'm like, "Oh, we're talking about bisexual POCs, and it's not Black, Indigenous people of color." Like my brain, there's just so many. I'm not a big fan of it, but I get why it's there, because we're trying to say, well, it's for this group of folks. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't think we're going to solve it, but it's.
And labeling. And I'll say at another level, communication is important, because you need a clear narrative to be able to operate together.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges, and even us, like, so we have our community, and it's like, oh, there's another community, right? Yeah. But again, we're trying to create an environment that gives people what they need specifically at a particular time in their lives. And it's kind of different from maybe your entry level, and you're working in work that's more blue collar work. Might be slightly different. So you'll need a different way to connect. And I think that those subgroups provide value,
Yeah.
But at some sense, you need to kind of figure out, like, how do you bring it back home and how do you collectively make sure that it's part of the overall narrative?
Yeah. So let me ask you this question, because I'm going to ask you this question. So you've lived in the States now 3.5 years. I'm curious, what has been the cultural transitions for you, for someone who lived in the UK, who's in that European space, and then now you are for all intents and purposes, a Black man in in Oakland. What was different for you?
So just talking about the US in general, I would say the scale is just hard to fathom if you don't live here. So, and that was, people were a little bit more connected, I would say, regionally and by states during COVID, because you would meet somebody that was in your local area before maybe a lot more often, and you wouldn't see people in other states, but now you just meet whoever, because it doesn't really matter where you are, and it's quite surprising on where they are in the US. So that vastness, was something that I had to get my head around. And it just, I think there's so much opportunity in the US for business to be able to collaborate together, to be able to do things, but it's hard to see when you're in your own environment. And I think being in the UK, there's less business opportunity, I would say, to start something that is going to be, and you can do it, and it's not easy. It's not, and I'll give you an example. If you take the recruiting industry, for instance, I think there's like 19,000 recruiting companies in the UK, and there's only 69, 70 million people in the UK, and it's like 330, 320 in the US, something like around that. And there's 19,000 recruiting companies. So it's like the share, market share. So that's like business wise. So I just think there's vast opportunity. And I think people say, I'm going to go to the US to make it still. I'm going to go to the US to make my, I don't think people say they're going to go to the UK to make it.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the narrative I hear. So I think there's huge opportunity from that side. From the individual's standpoint, I was talking to my barber the other day, and he's from Oakland, and we were having a conversation. He's like, and he was like, yeah, when people see you, they think you just that. But when they talk to you, they realize.
Like, what?
And that's what he said to me. Yeah. And that was funny because it's like when the perception of how you're seen.
Yeah.
People have preconceived notions, I think, here of who you are and what you are until they have a conversation with you, because you're either going to be in one bucket or another bucket.
Right.
And I think that's probably a little bit, it's similar depending on the area you are. And also what, like, if I'm walking down the street with my hoodie on, which I will do, and a tracksuit, because that's what I wear one day, on the other day that I'm in a shirt and suit, like, you're just going to get treated differently.
Yeah.
So I think that there's preconceived notions and perceptions that happen all over the world. And I don't think that that's just the US. Yeah.
Do you think what you're doing with your business would look different if you were in the UK right now? Or would it be the mission would be the same, but maybe approach would look different?
It's a good question. I don't know if I would do the same thing in the UK. Only because I think that you can impact more people in the US. And that's really one part of what we want to do, is ensure that we can impact as many people as possible. So I think in the UK, the business would probably be more focused on access to the opportunity. So maybe the recruiting piece. Okay. I think here the community piece is even more important because people are in so many different areas and so vast. And it's not that it's not different in the UK, because you've got big cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and then you've also got London, but you kind of connect with everyone then, because only 2 hours away drive. It's not right.
Really?
Like, yeah, it's like, and then the furthest place you'd ever drive is like to Newcastle from London, which is like 4 hours.
That's not far at all. You're in California.
Yeah.
4 hours.
Yes. So you'd always connect. Yeah, you'd always connect. And so I think that I don't know if it'd be the same business, I think to help people get access to fulfill their potential is something that I always do and want to do.
Yeah.
But the approach to community and bringing more people together from even just diverse states, even if you happen to all be black and happen to be all be in a role, like there's so much you can learn from each other.
Black people in North Carolina are very different from Black people in Oakland. I can tell you that.
What's the main difference?
Probably the accent. No.
Yeah.
You know what? Accent, food. And here's the thing. A lot of Black people who are not in the South have stories that start in the South because of that's where their family origins are. So here's the funny part. I think if you were to, whenever it's not COVID and you're talking to more people, if you talk to Black people, it doesn't matter whether it's Chicago, New York, Cali, everybody got a grandma or great grandma that's from these neck of the woods.
Yeah.
So this is actually where I told this to someone the other day and they didn't even realize it. The largest concentration of Black people is going to be in the Southern United States. It don't matter how many you think there are in California or New York or Chicago or anywhere else. It'll actually be the South, because then when they did their migration patterns, they went to all these other cities.
Yeah.
So everybody's got a story. It's so funny. Even people up north, everyone has a story about, I used to come down and see my grandparents in, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And so I guess where I'm very curious to hear from you, sort of as we're wrapping up, but I think this is important. As someone who's worked with diverse teams, who is helping and creating these opportunities for diverse professionals, if someone is thinking about really going out into, expanding their career and really looking at opportunities beyond whatever country they're in, what do you think are the key things that they need to know in order to make it on these multicultural, multinational, international spaces?
Before you need it, build your connections.
Yeah.
So there's two things you can be building every day, and one is your brand, and the second is your connections. And you build your brand as you interact with people. Mm-hmm. So interact with as many people as you can, and let them go away thinking, you know what, they're all right. I quite like them. And next time that something comes up, I'll connect them. So I think if you do that, that's fine. You never know. And it's not that you'll necessarily need them. They may need you, but building that over a long period of time, I think is very valuable. So that would be one of the main things I would say. And also try, if you can, and it's hard to do this, but if you can go somewhere where if you're moving, it's entirely up to you. It depends on what you want to do. But if you want to be part of a multinational organization, somebody said to me a while back, which I do agree, it's like hard to move into a new country, start a new job, have a new set of friends, and also maybe like have a new family, right? Depending on what you do. So think about maybe how you would prioritize those and start with a couple. You can dive right in and you probably just be fine. But that's one thing that I think has been helpful for us in particular, just making sure that you've got some people that that are on the ground that you can kind of shortcut things like setting up banks and just things like that would just be like,
right.
Gosh. Yeah.
Was it difficult for you?
Nah, it really wasn't. It was actually really easy. So because we've got family in different areas, and I was able to pick up the phone and just call people, and it was so helpful. So yeah. I
can vouch for that. If you got people who know what they're doing, it can make it a lot less painless. But you're right. I think the networking, I've said this to people ad nauseum. If you're looking for an opportunity, you need to start talking to folks because they've got insight. And so I think that what you've said is absolutely in the affirmative. So, all right, Marcus, we made it.
Well, just about, right?
We did. So if people are looking to connect with you, and I will have this in the show notes, where can they find you?
So we have a link, which is just eq.app. So eq.app, and then we've got multiple links. So we own eq.app, which is cool. And then you've got eq.community. Those are the two places where I hang out. Outside of that, in the normal world, LinkedIn, just first name, last name, connect with me, if you're a company that wants to learn more about what we're doing in D&I, or if you want to be part of the community, yeah, those are the places.
I'm trying to think how you scored such a simple URL. It was available, or did you have to buy it?
You know what? I'm a domain junkie. I've been buying domains for years. If we have an idea right now, I'll buy the domain. So I've been storing domains forever. So you've had it. Yeah. So I'm actually proud of the EQ.app. It didn't cost me that much, but I think it's valued. Yeah, it's all right now.
No, I love it. It's simple because I'm going to remember it. Like, I love it. It's simple and straight to the point. So yeah, we'll make sure we'll have the links in the show notes, and they'll be up on the Black Expat website and the Global Chatter, so everyone will be able to find it. But yeah, thank you once again for coming on. I think that your work is awesome. I'm probably going to join because why not?
100%. We'd love to have you.
Oh, you're like, now I have to. It's on the tape that I'm joining, so now I have to join. So that means the rest of y'all should join. But thank you once again for listening to this latest episode, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Amanda.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.